Thanks for stopping by to check out yet another episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the KEF Model 107 reference loudspeaker, this guy right here. A little bit of history on it. KEF made these between 1986 and 1989. They were their top of the line loudspeaker, and they sold for $4,500 a pair, which in today's money would be about $11,000. I'm going to bring up a picture that shows a cutaway view of the loudspeaker that KEF had in their pamphlet, but basically they have a 1-inch inverted dome tweeter as well as a 5.5-inch mid-range, and they have two 10-inch woofers. I will remove the cover here in just a moment, but I wanted to take a moment and explain why I happen to have this pair of loudspeakers. So back in 1979, when I was embarking on a mobile DJ part-time career while being a college student here at the University of Arizona, I was auditioning different loudspeakers. The hi-fi shop that I was dealing with was Jerry's Audio, which is no longer around here in Tucson. And while auditioning different loudspeakers, they had some KEF 105.2s, and I listened to those and I really liked them, and I will never forget they have a little LED on them that comes on when the power level gets too loud and the tweeter starts clipping. That made an indelible impression in my young audiophile mind. I ended up not getting the KEF 105.2s and got my industrial clips Lascalas, of which I did a video on a ways back. So as I got a bit older and had more time on my hands and was getting back into two-channel stereo, I started looking for things that I either owned or wished I could have owned as a youngster, i.e. a college student or a young adult before kids. The KEF 105.2s were on that list, and so I started checking Craigslist. I didn't find some, but I did see some KEF 107s, and they kind of look like the 105s. When I take this off, you'll see what I'm talking about. I started doing some research on the 107s and found out they were a much better speaker than the 105.2s, and ultimately I ended up purchasing them. Well, the story does not end so well, because had I done the proper amount of research, I would have realized that these speakers have a problem with the foam around the woofers rotting, as do a lot of speakers that are of that age, with the foams deteriorating around the woofers. And in this case, there are 4 woofers that the foam had deteriorated with. I did not know that when I purchased the speakers, so it took me a weekend to re-foam the woofers, and I am quite happy with that. The parts to do it are under $100, and I will post a link to a Word file that I did that described the whole process and all the little tricks that I learned. Also, the tweeters have ferrofluid in them to help cool them, and when the speakers are of this age, the ferrofluid can dry out and cause overheating and burning of the tweeters. So I did have mine sent out. There's a service that advertises on eBay, and it's about $60 to get a tweeter re-ferrofluided, and I have had that done this past year. If you are interested in who I used, I can provide that information as well. Just ask in the comment section below. So there are not original, but the things that needed service have been serviced, and I am very happy with the results. As far as the specifications on the speaker, KEF said they had a 90 dB SPL measured 1 meter away using a 2.83 volt RMS pink noise signal, and the frequency response was listed at plus or minus 2 dB from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. I do have some measurements that I did on the speakers, and we'll see those in a little bit. And they also said the speaker is basically a 4-ohm speaker, and I measured the impedance, and you'll see that in just a little bit as well. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the top and show you the working part. I will say that I keep the top on just because I think it looks nicer. There is a slight degradation in the highs. The sound pressure level drops just a small amount, but I generally keep these on. I just think they look nicer. But I forgot to mention that for the $4,500 admission price for a pair of KEF 107 reference loudspeakers, you also got the KEF KUBE. That's KUBE. and that stood for KEF User Variable Equalizer. It was an active equalizer that you could insert in your tape monitor loop, or you could put it between your power amp and preamp if you so desired. And this is what it looked like from the front. It had a couple of controls on the front that you could adjust to vary the low frequency bass response. The control marked contour is used to control the low frequency, mid frequency balance. The extension control is used for setting the speaker's bass cutoff frequency, and the one marked Q factor is to adjust the dampening. And this is what it looks like from the rear. If you wanted to still use the tape monitor functions, then you would wire those in accordingly. Now, it also had a mid-range and treble response, and you will see the effect of the KUBE's frequency response as well as some THD-SNR measurements in the data section of this video. Oh boy. So this is the KEF Model 107 with the cover removed, and you can see the tweeter obviously is here. Here's the mid-range. Now, the port for the bass is right here, and they call it a bandpass design, and when it is cranking out some lower frequency stuff, you can feel the air being moved out of that big opening. It does have this cool feature that it can swivel, and that really makes it nice to set the toe in on the speakers. So this is a rear view of the head assembly of the KEF Model 107, and you can just kind of see that it swivels. Right here is the it's an XLR connector that brings the tweeter and mid-range wires up to it from crossover down below. When the XLR connector is removed, you can lift this up and separate it from the bass section. So that is one of the 4 feet that you can adjust on the Model 107 to get the speaker leveled should you require that. So here we have the speaker's connectors, and they are a 3-way binding post. In my opinion, that's what they would be. I still don't know how you get 5 ways, but to me they're a 3-way binding post. They're nicely marked, which is plus or negative, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's also a red color here, a red washer and a black washer over there, in case you didn't see the plus or minus. Also, you could either put in a banana lug here. You can unscrew this nice big knurled knob, and you can hook your spade lug there and mount it down, or you can put a very nice 10 gauge wire there. Probably could do more than 10 gauge, probably a bigger gauge than 10 gauge, maybe even 8 gauge down here, and tighten it down. There's plenty of room between the two knurled knobs there, and I think these are really a nice speaker connector. This first piece of data that I have for you is the speaker impedance that I measured on one of the KEF 107 speakers. I had measured both of them in the past, and they pretty much look the same, so for this video I am only showing data on the serial number 193 speaker. The big takeaway is that the real portion of the impedance, which is the blue line, is basically 4 ohms throughout the entire frequency band. For a few points it goes as high as maybe 5.5 ohms and as low as maybe 3.8 ohms. But for the most part, this thing is a 4 ohm speaker, and it is the flattest speaker impedance that I have measured to date. You can also see that the phase is pretty stable as well. It might go as high as about 11 ohms and as low as 8. So it pretty much does not vary in phase that much across the band. And as I said, I have not measured a speaker that showed as flat an impedance. And basically you could call it a 4 ohm speaker, and it should present a very stable load for your amplifier. What we are looking at are the frequency responses of the KEF 107 speaker with and without the KUBE equalizer in play. This plot right here is with the KUBE out, and this is with the KUBE in the circuit. I should point out that the measurements are made with a calibrated microphone placed 1 meter away from the speaker, and it's pointing in between the tweeter and the mid-range speakers. This speaker is kind of in the center of my room where I have been doing my speaker measurements. So if you look at this trace right here, this is with the KUBE in, and once you see the frequency response of the KUBE, this makes a lot of sense because there is a bass boost at the low end of the frequency spectrum. And you can see that this guy right here is definitely larger than this response right here, which this response here is without the KUBE. So it definitely is about, looks like 12, 13 dB more gain at the low frequency section. Also, I should point out again that this is a suck out caused by the room, as is this guy right here, and even this peak here is caused by room interactions. The KUBE equalizer has a frequency response dip in the mid-range area, and that's kind of seen right here as compared to the trace without the equalizer on. And you'll see that when you look at the frequency response, and then they kind of equalize out after that. So that's kind of just showing the effect of the KUBE. And I am going to go into the corner of the room. So I move the speaker back to where I normally listen to it, and it's in the corner up against a wall. And here is that response. So same speaker, the microphone's placed a meter away, pointing in between the tweeter and the mid-range speakers. And you can see that this suck out right here is now gone, and we're looking at a pretty even response. We still have some probably room interactions here and here. One thing I will point out, you see all this little oscillation here at the high end. Well, the speaker is right in the corner of the room, and it's right up against the wall, and I'm pretty sure that this little high frequency aberration is caused by the effect of the speaker being just a few inches or probably half a foot away from the wall. What you are looking at here is the effect that the KUBE equalizer has on the frequency response. For this test, I had an 8 ohm dummy load hooked up to the output of the amplifier that normally would be running the 107, and the flat response is with the KUBE out of the circuit. It's in the tape monitor circuit, so the tape monitor circuit would be out, and that is our flat response, and it's somewhere between, it looks like, 13 and 14 dB for the most part. If you look at the far left number in the top one, 18, that is the extension. The next number, the 0.5, is the Q factor, and then the final number on the right where it says 0, that is the contour setting. So this graph kind of shows the different effects of the KUBE depending on its settings. Also, if you look at around 2 kilohertz, you can see a dip, and that actually is desired by the KUBE, that mid-range dip from maybe 1 kilohertz to 4 kilohertz. There's a dip, and that is by design by the KUBE. Regardless of its settings, it's always going to give you that as long as it's switched in. This plot just shows the THD SNR at 1 kilohertz for the KUBE measured by itself, and I just wanted to show that at least at 1 kilohertz the amount of distortion that the KUBE adds to the signal is very small. So the KEF Model 107 reference loudspeakers are not quite as efficient as the Wilson Series 3 Puppy 2 loudspeakers that I reviewed a few videos back. In fact, they're about 3 dB less efficient according to what I measured with the speakers placed in this particular area of this room. As you saw in the data, when the speaker is in its normal position in the room, the low frequency bass looks really good, and that suck out at 31 Hertz is gone. So now that it's all said and done, what do I really think about the sound of the KEF Model 107 loudspeakers? Well, I'm a little bit biased because they are my speakers, but I honestly can say to you that they are some of the finest speakers that I have listened to. Now, I have not listened to $50,000 and up pairs of speakers, but with all the speakers that I've heard at a lot of my audiophiles, friends' houses, these definitely sound as good, if not better, than the majority of them. They're a different sounding speaker than my Klipsch Scalas, which are in another room, but overall these do a great job of presenting a nice soundstage and imaging, and They have plenty of bass when they're in the corner of the room. At least one speaker is in the corner of the room. And if you could pick up a pair for a reasonable price, they're probably not something you want to have shipped, but if you have a chance to listen to them, be aware that they need to have the surrounds replaced if they have not. And if you're not capable of doing that, make sure that a shop in your town is capable of doing that, and that you know how much it's going to cost, because that should be added into the cost of the speaker. And if the tweeters have not had the ferro fluid replaced, that would be something I would recommend having done as well. That being said, I would highly recommend the KEF Model 107 loudspeakers. I do like the fact that you can angle them here to get your sweet spot in, and the posts on the back where you connect your amplifier to are great. I do a lot of connecting and disconnecting from them, so it's nice to be able to have a lot of room and a good connector. Once again, I thank you for taking some time out of your day or night to check out this video. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. And if you have not subscribed to the channel and would like to do so, that would be nice. And I always like to hear people's comments in the comment section below. And once again, until next time, have a great day or night.